English translation, 230th Contact, Part 4, Wednesday, 11th October, 1989, 04.1 hours.
Then a question about protein. Athletes stuff themselves full of protein products to build muscles, have more strength, and be more enduring. In a newspaper article, one could read that in this regard, the body is often supplied with up to 3 and 4 grams of protein, whereby especially dairy products and the protein of the eggs play an important role. For my part, however, I think that this certainly cannot be healthy.
That is of rightness, since in fact the supply of this kind of protein to the body is harmful to health and can under certain circumstances even lead to death. Too much protein removes calcium from the bones, making them brittle and fragile. In particular, larger amounts of milk should be avoided, for this deprives the body of particularly large amounts of calcium. Too much protein also damages the kidney function, and hence the overall health of the body. Children of all ages are particularly susceptible with respect to health impairment of various forms caused by milk protein, which is why they should be given as little milk and milk dishes as possible. Especially small children should not be given milk other than mother's milk, and therefore no animal milk. Larger amounts of milk taken regularly are harmful for adults as well. The daily need for protein in a human being, however, is usually 500 to 1,000 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, whereby the need for protein increases with major efforts and is allowed to reach a maximum value of 1,750 milligrams. Small children should be placed at the lower limit of the above-mentioned amount, which therefore also means that the need for protein can change according to age, which is why under certain circumstances, older human beings, as well as also younger ones, may have a lower protein need. However, if this is not taken into account, there is a danger of osteoporosis appearing, a condition in which calcium, phosphorus, and alkaline phosphatase are in the reference range. Any milligram above this level can cause damage to the health, affecting both the body and the bones as well as the brain, whereby the latter's clear function is impaired. And before you ask, osteoporosis represents a systemic disease of the skeleton, whereby a reduction in bone mass occurs as well as a deterioration in the quality of the microarchitecture of bone tissue. This condition means that the bones are brittle and fragile, and hence the risk of fracture is enormously high. This condition already occurs in younger human beings as primary idiopathic, that is to say, juvenile osteoporosis. The secondary osteoporosis occurs at an advanced age, namely mainly involution osteoporosis. Speaking especially of the terrestrial human being, it has to be said that the age osteoporosis increases continuously worldwide because the body and the bones, as well as the brain, etc., are not supplied with the necessary substances through the food. For quite some time now, the food, also vegetables and fruits, have been lacking more and more of the substances that are vital for the human being, such as vitamins, trace elements and minerals, etc., which increasingly leads to diseases and to the reduction of bone substance. And this trouble will still increase in the near future. It is therefore advisable that, in addition to the usual food, all deficient substances are separately supplied to the body, namely in the form of food supplements, such as those freely available for purchase worldwide. Pathogenetically, the development of osteoporosis is determined by the excessive degradation of bone substance, which occurs through the osteoclasts, which normally regulate the constantly occurring bone renewal. Osteoporosis may well be the result of genetic or hereditary factors, whereby physical activity also plays a certain role, but in particular malnutrition, along with endocrine, gastrointestinal, and malignant diseases. Various medications can also contribute to osteoporosis, as can all kinds of pleasure foods, which also include alcohol. Due to a reduction of the mechanical resilience, the risk of fractures increases. If fractures appear in the extremities, then these are associated with acute pain, which, however, disappears again after the fracture has healed. However, if fractures occur in the spinal vertebrae, pain usually persists even after the healing process and degenerates chronically. This is because permanent deformities occur with incongruities of the small vertebral joints. Changes in the statics and false burdening of ligaments, muscles, and tendons also contribute to chronic pain. The lack of certain substances, such as mainly vitamin D, fluoride, calcium, estrogen, progestin, and calcitonin, leads to osteoporosis, which is why these substances must also be supplied if osteoporosis has already become acute. These substances inhibit the bone resorption, but this also applies to specific drugs. If the human being reaches an advanced age and is affected by osteoporosis, then certain anabolic steroids can also be very helpful. Gymnastics, physiotherapy, and analgesics should not be used generically, but rather adapted to the clinical pattern of the person affected by osteoporosis. The prevention of osteoporosis should also be a rule and an obligation for human beings with a healthy bone structure who nevertheless have an increased risk of osteoporosis or osteopenia, but who are still spared from fractures. This rule and duty also applies to the advanced age and is highly recommended. Osteoporosis prevention also includes an increase in physical activity, and especially a calcium-rich diet and a sufficient amount of vitamin D, in addition to all other substances. A sufficient exposure to sunlight is also very important, whereby, however, care must be taken that the eyesight as well as skin and tissue are not damaged by the sun's rays. This warning is particularly important in future times, because as the ozone layer fades, the sun's rays become more and more aggressive, and summers will get hotter and hotter in later years. Thus, the sun will increase the risk of black skin cancer in future times, and thereby it will affect especially those human beings who did, due to their irrationality, expose themselves unprotected to the sun's radiation.
What an explanation that turned out to be. But thank you very much for being so detailed. How do you view that, my son? After all, wars are always unwarranted, because in such a case it is always only about greed for power, addiction to profit, conquest, revenge, retaliation, and about the subjugation of groups, tribes, and peoples. That is why I think that there has never been a legitimate war, and that there never will be a legitimate war. In my view of the whole thing, the truth is that there can only be a legitimate peace.
That is of rightness, my friend.
Then more words are superfluous. However, just say, what do you think about more and more people claiming that they have been kidnapped by extraterrestrials? Women claim that they were pregnant by extraterrestrials, and then later the procreated children were extracted from them and brought to a foreign world. Others, also men, claim that they were abducted by extraterrestrials and medically examined or provided with implants.
In 9999.09 cases, this is a senseless imagination, as our latest investigations have shown.
That is also my assumption. If all the nonsense about contacts with extraterrestrials regarding abductions and examinations by extraterrestrials, etc., worldwide and especially in North, Central, and South America were to correspond to the correctness, then the Earth would be teeming with extraterrestrials. In fact, one would then only have to encounter extraterrestrials every step of the way. As I see things, It is as a rule a matter of notorious imaginations that lead to beliefs and delusions, whereby exceptions, as you say, amount to just about 0.01 cases per 10,000. The origin of these imaginations can be manifold, such as, for example, religious or sectarian belief, anxiety, gullibility, influencings by lies and fantasy stories of liars, swindlers and charlatans or jokers, etc., and so forth. And once notorious imaginations have arisen in the human being through thoughts and feelings, then these have such a mighty effect on the psyche and the consciousness that a mania emerges, from which in turn a delusion develops in the shortest time. Once this has developed, then the same happens as with notorious lying, namely that no distinction can any more be made between lying and truth. In the case of the notorious illusion, which, to my knowledge, is still unknown to our earthly psychologists and psychiatrists and does not make sense to them either, it is no longer possible to distinguish between illusion and reality. Just as the notorious liar considers his lies to be effective truth and reality, so also the one who is in the grip of a notorious illusion sees his illusions as effective truth and reality. The ability to distinguish is destroyed. In this state, the person affected by the delusion of imagination no longer recognizes the reality, because also his or her content of memory had been built up delusionally by the manic illusion. And the fact that the whole is also transferred to the subconscious and manifests itself from there again into the consciousness is only the end result of it all. Therefore, it is also no longer surprising that even through a process of hypnosis, only the delusion of imagination is expressed and reflected. For through the hypnosis, the fixed delusion of imagination is mobilized, whereby the hypnotized person does not reveal the effective truth, but only the facts of the delusion of imagination, in which everything is regarded as truth and reality. But there is even more that happens in this delusion, namely that the persons ill with the delusion of imagination, because that is whom we are dealing with, also imagine things such as marks of wounds and burns in such a delusional way that these actually form on the body or on the limbs, and these can even hurt. We are talking here about a visually and organically observable form of psychosomatics and psychosomatosis, which can ultimately even lead to acute psychoneurosis and thus to psychogenic disorders, such as, for example, compulsive neurosis, depressive neurosis, and anxiety neurosis. In some cases, even a somatoform disorder, that is to say a personality disorder, may occur.
You are well versed in these matters. Many an earthly psychologist and psychiatrist could learn a lot from you. What you have said corresponds in all aspects to the exact correctness.
Many will not like what I have explained, but it is my freedom to tell the truth. Besides, a small part of the freedom is actually to be allowed to tell the truth to the human beings.
This is a good phrase.
Then once again something about the Earth's moon, that is to say concerning the first alleged moon landing of the Americans, which is supposed to have been on 20th of July 1969. This theater spectacle was only organized for the sake of politics, and allegedly in order to achieve a huge success before the Soviet Union, because at that time the Russians were already on the verge of preceding the Americans with a manned moon landing. However, following the American giant swindle with the alleged moon landing, which was cinematically faked in America on suitable terrain, 5 moon landings actually took place afterwards until 1972. In order to prepare and carry out these landings, the Americans needed more time than they had until 1969. For this reason, and indeed also because of the politics, the giant swindle was staged, and the whole of humankind was shamefully deceived. Will this swindle actually never be uncovered? It also amazes me why the Americans never actually mentioned anything about the fact that there are large areas at the south and north poles of the moon, where there is a constant day, as I saw when in my early youth in 1946 Sfath, and then in 1975 Sim Yaseh, offered me the chance to observe the moon from close up, and to see the space junk that the Earthlings transported there.
The cooked-up story of the allegedly first moon landing will probably never be cleared up. And with regard to the areas of continuous days at the moon's south pole and north pole, it has to be said that I too do not understand why there is no public reference to them.
Then something else. When I was at the Aral Sea with Simyase years ago, it lies in the lowlands of Turan in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and is fed by the rivers Amu Darja and Sir Darja. The lake was much smaller than I still saw it when I was there with Sfath. Also, in 1960 I was there with Asket, whereby she said that the lake was still 68,400 square kilometers large. Once it was the fourth largest lake on Earth. But due to a rigorous removal of water for irrigation purposes, it is now only about 31,000 square kilometers in size, while also the salinity of the lake constantly increases, as Simyase said. Already Sfath explained that the lake has a very important climatic importance, namely not only for the areas around the Aral Sea itself, but also for the whole of Europe. However, since the lake with no runoff receives less and less water from the rivers because it is taken away by the local inhabitants for fruit and vegetable plantations, it will slowly but surely dry out, thereby causing increased salt formation and large dust and sandstorms. Now the question is, whether one can see from the future how far the insanity of the human beings will still go in the aforementioned respect, whether they will finally let rationality prevail and return the water to both rivers, or whether everything will still get worse and the Aral Sea will finally disappear.
I know you went to the Aral Sea with Sfath and Simyase. As it all looks, the human beings will unfortunately not assume their responsibility. Consequently, the lake will dry out more and more, which will result in the polar cold air no longer being able to warm up above the waters of the lake, which will in future lead to the appearance of crass climatic changes that will also affect the whole of Europe.
Thus that is also clear. Sfath told me in 1946 that our Milky Way and the Andromeda Galaxy would one day merge, but he did not mention any time. Do you know anything about it?
Certainly. 10,000 million years will still elapse between now and then.
Well, then we still have some time. Then I would like to come back to our joint deep-sea trip. You told me after this fantastic trip that the spotlights that illuminated the deep-sea darkness for hundreds of meters around the ship corresponded to a very special kind. But you did not elaborate further on it. Can you at least explain it to me now?
The light beam device, that is to say the spotlights. These are not several devices, but only a single one comprising the entire beam ship, which can be used as a single light beam device on the outer hull. The light, however, is not in the usual form known to you. Hence, it does not emit rays of light in the usual sense. In fact, these are invisible light-swinging waves, which cannot be seen from outside the beam ship, so that the ship remains thus completely dark. The invisible light-swinging waves can only be perceived in the beam ship itself, namely, through the walls. The outer environment is therefore not immersed in a visible wall of light, but only in certain swinging waves, which can be made visible to us in the beam ship by our special technology. So it seems as if outside everything would be bathed in the brightest visible light, while outside, however, there is complete darkness. Only in this way is it possible for us to observe the deep-sea life forms undisturbed. Since these are self-luminaries, as we call them, the visible light means danger for them because the life forms hunt each other also in the deep sea and mean food for each other. Therefore, if the beam ship were to emit visible light from outside, all life forms would flee from it, making it impossible for us to observe them. The beam ship, if it were to emit rays of light visible from outside, would appear to the deep-sea life forms as an evil and all-devouring monster, which is why they would flee.
Very interesting. So then this light has also nothing to do with the light that you shield in the atmosphere.
That is of rightness.
Then another question that also concerns the ocean. You said in our deep sea passage that the Earth human would reduce the pH value of the oceans. What is it all about?
In fact, as a result of the irrationality of human beings, the pH value of the oceans is reduced, and the water temperature is changed, which leads to a strong acidification of the ocean water. However, this has the consequence that fauna and flora are impaired in the oceans, and evolutionary changes occur for which the human beings bear the responsibility. Thereby, very severe changes will occur for certain living beings, which carry lime shells, like for example corals, because the lime which is necessary and vital for them will no longer be available to them.
That too is clear. Then this. Do you know how long Mongoloidism has existed among Earth humans? Further, I would like to ask you again something, which refers to your meat production. You have not killed any animals for thousands of years to cover your meat needs. At most, in an emergency, you slaughter small animals. Something that, however, also has not happened since then, since you started producing meat artificially. Also, you produce the meat through two different processes. That is how I remember your explanation in Simyaseus.
We know that Mongoloidism has already appeared in the so-called Stone Age. And as for the meat, it has to be said that you remember correctly. For several millennia, we have no longer satisfied our meat needs by the killing of animals, but by an artificial production of meat. One technical process occurs such that the meat is replicated through the use of elementary substances that are present everywhere in the outer space and in the atmosphere. You once called this process multi-duplication. The second process entails growing the meat from cell cultures in large-scale facilities. Thereby the cell strains are of different species, which means that different types of meat are cultivated from different large and small animals, fish, birds, and poultry, as well as seafood.
Aha, but our scientists know nothing about this, and about the ancient origins of Mongoloidism. Then a question regarding Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. He taught that the light rays in the vicinity of large masses run in curved paths.
That is of rightness. Therefore, it is not a theory, but the reality. However, the light rays are not only bent in the outer space by large masses such as stars and planets, but also by so-called wild magnetic fields in the outer space, as well as by neutrino masses and dark energy masses, etc., which assemble in the outer space. The same applies equally on planets, but in hardly measurable form, if artificial light sources are used on them, because they also bend unnoticeably when their light encounters larger masses.
And since light has a mass and a weight, it can probably also be used for the braking effect if it is only strong enough. So I think that a tremendously strong spotlight could, for example, even bring a moving vehicle to a standstill.
This is of rightness, but the light source would have to be beam-bundled and tremendously strong.
I thought so. Do you still have time, because I still have some questions?
I am in no hurry.
Thank you. You once said that the rapidly increasing global warming will endanger the flora and fauna, and that, precisely due to the global warming, in about 100 years, that is to say until about the year 2100, on our beautiful planet up to a quarter or more of all plants and creatures of the waters, and on land will die out just as much as also many bird species, etc.
That is of rightness. The climate change, and hence also the global warming, entail very serious consequences by which the entire ecological household is disturbed and changed.
Then now a question, about which both Svath and Ptah said something to me. Both said that in every galaxy, thus also in ours, only in a certain outer distance around the galaxy center, solar systems with planets can exist, on which there can also be life in the form of small and large animals as well as human life forms. Is the distance to the center of the galaxy dependent on the size of the galaxy, and thus different from galaxy to galaxy? And something else regarding the solar giants I was allowed to see on the great journey with Simya, Se, and Ptah. The largest giant structure, about 11,000 million light-years away, was about 10,000 times larger than our Sun. Various others were somewhat smaller, but also at a distance of thousands of millions of light-years. On this point, however, I remember that there are also such giant suns much closer to the Earth, like those at a distance of approximately 50,000 light-years, which are only a little more than 150 times larger than our SOL, but have nevertheless a radiation power which exceeds that of our Sun by a factor of about 50 million. However, our earthly scientists do not have the foggiest idea of these giant formations. This mainly because their instruments are not sufficient for spotting anything at these huge distances. In addition, dark, dust, and gas clouds lie between the Earth and many giant suns as well as galaxies, whereby these gigantic objects cannot be seen. As Ptah and Simya Se explained and showed me on my great journey, such clouds are particularly common from around 14,000 million light-years onwards. Consequently, it is only with extremely special apparatuses, devices, and instruments possible to look beyond these ranges. Already from a distance of 12,000 million light-years onwards, it becomes very difficult to detect galaxies, etc. Ptah said that for this reason the Earthlings, the astronomy scientists, would continue to assume for a long time that the origin of the universe would be at a distance of 12 to 14,000 million light-years, which of course does not correspond to the correctness, because in truth, the universe is already more than 46 million years old, and tremendously much larger than the scientists envision it. But now I would also like to turn to the giant Sun, which is a little between 16,000 and 17,000 light-years away from Earth in the constellation Eagle, which I was also allowed to marvel at on the great journey. I told somebody about this and about the other sun formations I mentioned, who then insulted me. In fact, an American astrophysicist recently visited me, and I told him about my observations in outer space and about Ptah's explanations, and also told him that there were black holes too in galaxies, etc. Such a black hole, for example, would play a very important role in the constellation of the Eagle, where there would be a gigantic sun, namely a huge entity, from which a black hole would draw off gases with a temperature of about 100 million degrees at a speed of approximately 80,000 kilometers per second, whereby, however, part of the gases would not be able to be captured by the black hole and would therefore blast out into the free outer space. The man's thanks were such that he called me a fantasist, a fraud and a liar, but also insulted me with other obscene words, and then left the center angrily. The question: should I keep silent about all these things in the future, or should I continue to report on what I know in this regard? After all, it should be my duty to stand up ready for open talk and answer. But now, after this incident, I no longer know whether I should continue to address questions that relate to things that are still unknown to earthly scientists.
Your assumption regarding the distance to the center of the galaxy is correct. Let me answer your last question thusly. Silence might be the right method, because the narrow-mindedness of certain earthly scientists does not allow you, as a layman, to know more than they do. But what you should do regarding information is the following. Guido Moosbrugger will begin to work on and publish books in the next few years, which will deal with his calculations and your explanations in relation to the creation forms, the levels of evolution, the universe, and in general with all things of the creation and its laws. To him you should, in every conceivable wise, stand up ready for open talk and answer, as you have just called it. His work is of importance, but he can only complete it through your information and explanations. He needs your comprehensive help for his important work.
Okay, I will stick to that, in terms of the silence as well as for Guido's work. Then something concerning the earthquakes in the near future. In the next decade, there are supposed to be many severe earthquakes around the whole world. Next year, you said, there will be the second worst earthquake in Persia from those that will hit Iran in this century. The first severe one is to be in Persia shortly after the turn of the millennium, towards the end of 2003, in December. This major quake will then be followed by a whole number of other earthquakes, also in Persia, a short time later. If I remember correctly, however, the first severe earthquake in the near future will be on the 21st of June 1990, and will claim the lives of almost 41,000 human beings. You also explained in this regard, however, that for some reason the real number of all dead will be declared as only about 35,000 to 37,000. In February 1997, another earthquake is expected to occur, claiming some 900 human beings as fatalities. And in the month of May, Persia will be affected another time by an earthquake in which 2,700 human beings will die. After the turn of the millennium, in June 2002, another earthquake will kill 340 human beings. However, according to your words, these will only be the four most severe earthquakes in Persia, since there will also be various other earthquakes making their appearance. This also applies to the new millennium, namely already around the turn of the millennium 2003-2004 in Mexico, and on the 2nd of January and the 6th of February 2004 in Indonesia, which will be followed by a number more worldwide throughout the year. In the new millennium, Persia, especially Tehran, is said to be endangered by earthquakes. I have already been told by Svath. I do not remember it exactly, but I can remember that he was talking about several tectonic plates or trenches that would one day cause tremendous earthquakes deep under the sprawling area of the Iranian capital, possibly much worse than in San Francisco and Los Angeles.
That is of rightness. Tehran is particularly vulnerable to earthquakes, and all that regarding the tectonic characteristics is correct. However, regarding next year's earthquake, 629, the center of the severe earthquake on the 21st of June 1990 will be by the Caspian Sea. It will have a magnitude of 7.3 on the Richter scale. Around 120 smaller villages will be completely destroyed. The real origin of the heavy quake next year can be traced back to the many years of enormous shaking of the ground caused by the bombardments of the war between Iran and Iraq. The shocks caused by the bombings, etc., cause shifts in the interior of the earth, which often lead to severe earthquakes already in a short time, but sometimes only after several years, whereby underground or underwater explosions of any kind produce the worst effects. Some volcanic eruptions can also be traced back in this wise to the guilt of the human being. Iran, Persia, as you call it by its old name, has especially for about 30 years been in a tectonic earthquake cycle which will continue for a very long time and well into the third millennium. In the third millennium, the earthquakes in Iran will cause ever greater destruction and death. Strong earthquake in Greece Chronicle 1978, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Wednesday, 24 June 1978.
In that case, was the heavy earthquake of 1978 also cycle-related? And regarding this earthquake cycle, do our earthly geologists and the scientists who deal with earthquakes know that such earthquake cycles exist?
Your second question first. No. The earthly scientists have no knowledge of tectonic cycles yet. And your first question, yes, the 1978 earthquake in Iran belongs to this cycle. The quake was on 16th September 1978 and had a magnitude of 7.7 on the Richter scale, and about 27,400 human lives were to be lamented. In the same year, namely in the month of June, Greece was also shaken by an earthquake of 6.5 on the Richter scale, but the human beings escaped relatively unscathed, if one disregards 48 deaths. Other earthquakes will also follow in the coming years in Greece and throughout the world, as has already been said.
I remember that, as well as many other things, such as, for example, that at the beginning of August 1978, Pope Paul VI retired from life at the age of 80, and then on 26th of August, Pope John Paul I was elected to the office. To my knowledge, his real name was Albino Luciani. However, he could not enjoy his position for long, because due to his strong tendency towards reforms and his desire to turn much of Catholicism upside down, he was already made to depart from life 34 days later by a secret cardinal decision of the arch-conservative and fundamentalist cardinals, using a poison that was not detectable. Of course, this was vehemently denied by the Vatican in October, after the Polish Cardinal Karol Wojtyla was elected pope, who called himself John Paul II, in accordance with his direct predecessor. With this, however, I have now deviated from the topic, since we were indeed talking about the earthquakes in Persia. What do you know about the earthquakes in 1997 and 2002?
The first earthquake in Iran in the year 1997 will occur on 28th of February, namely in the northwestern mountains of Ardabil. And as you said, about 900 human beings will die during it. More than 12,000 houses will collapse. The second quake will take place on the 10th day of May near the border with Afghanistan, namely in the area of the cities of Birjan and Qain. A large area with the two cities and 12 villages will be completely devastated, with about 2,700 human beings losing their lives. The 2002 earthquake will be on 22nd June, claiming 340 human lives. This quake, too, will be in the northwest of the country, as the one of 28 February 1997. However, the worst earthquakes in human memory will only be worldwide in the third millennium, whereby not only Iran, but also various other countries around the world will be affected. But Iran in particular will be the subject of talk about earthquakes at the beginning of the new millennium. This will also apply to enormous volcanic activities that will bring a lot of suffering to the Earth humans.
If I think about how the houses in these cities and towns in Persia are built, mostly out of clay bricks, then it is not surprising that they collapse like houses of cards in an earthquake.
This method of construction is unfortunately common in countries such as Iran, as is the case in most desert countries, at least where there is still no state of modernity.
Exactly. But it also invariably leads very quickly to often right away thousands or umpteen thousands of human beings being buried and killed under the collapsing buildings during earthquakes. And then the whole world is surprised about this, because they have no idea of how criminally the houses are built, and that always so many killed are to be lamented precisely because of this primitive method of construction.
That is of rightness. Earthquake-proof residential buildings would simply have to be constructed.
That is what I think as well. But tell me, if I may once more come back to speak about the Gulf War which you talked about, what will be the real reason for that? You once made a remark that in addition to the existing American delusion of world domination, the official justifications were only pretexts and lies.
That is of rightness. The incumbent 41st President of the USA, George Herbert Walker Bush, will wage a war against Iraq in 1991 with a multinational army. The reason will be Iraq's invasion and annexation of Kuwait. However, Since the Iraqi army is strongly resisting and the allies of the USA do not want to continue the war in the end, it must be discontinued by Bush. However, the latter does not content himself with this, but begins to concoct an intrigue with his son George Walker Bush, so that he will sooner or later come to the helm of the American government in order to continue his father's endeavor and bring it to an end. Namely, the endeavor to annex the state of Iraq to the USA in order to get hold of its earth petroleum. The efforts will unfortunately be successful. Hence, Bush's son will become governor of Texas in 1995, where he will have many human beings executed as an autocratic death penalty fanatic, whereby a large number of innocent ones will be among them. He and his father will continue to work with friends to win the presidency of the United States, which will then also be accomplished. Thus, George Walker Bush Jr. will be appointed 43rd President of the United States of America in November 2000 by a monstrous, and until then unprecedented electoral fraud. With this, the goal of father and son Bush will be reached, who will then work secretly and criminally towards the plan to once again cover Iraq with war and to get hold of the country as well as its earth petroleum.
Outrageous, really outrageous. But it will be as outrageous as that when the WTC will be destroyed by terrorists with hijacked commercial airplanes, whereby thousands of human beings will die, that Bush Jr. and several of his criminal confidants will then know this but do nothing about it. A criminal act so that Bush gains the upper hand and can move against Islam, of course always under the guise of wanting to free the USA and the world from terrorism. But there is no talk of the Bushes bringing the greatest terror to the world, at least over the next 15 years.
That is of correctness.
Many human beings are simply obedient to the powerful of the state and lowly intelligent enough to allow themselves to be wrapped around their little fingers by them, especially when it comes to criminals at the head of the state.
Unfortunately, that is also of correctness. In your explanation regarding the WTC, you referred to our conversation, during which I also explained that the USA strives for world domination too. You did not mention that.
I did not forget that, but rather still wanted to touch on it, which is now no longer necessary. But I have something else for that, namely concerning AIDS. There are time and again women who are HIV positive, and yet procreate and give birth to children. What do you think about that?
I am aware of this, though I consider such action to be completely irresponsible, for a variety of reasons. Because according to our cognitions and experiences, health changes occur in the immune system of the offspring, whereby in the longer term genetic changes occur which also affect subsequent generations. This implies that in the course of the subsequent generations of the children conceived in a HIV-positive state, even if they themselves do not develop illness from the virus, genetically caused changes in the immune system occur, which can no longer be cured. These immune system changes have such an effect that they can already appear in the next generation, but also only after 2, 3, 4, or even more generations, whereby then completely new disease patterns and epidemics will be present, and these will no longer be recognized to be HIV in their origin.
Which of course is denied by our clever medics when they learn about your explanation.
Unfortunately, this will indeed be the case, but at least the more distant future will prove the correctness of my words.
I have no doubt about that. But tell me, when is it supposed to be that prostitution is subject to state tax regulations, as you once said quite some time ago? And what is meant by the fact that efforts would soon be made, as you also explained, to make prostitution an official occupation requiring training? Are the times of Sodom and Gomorrah now really returning? At least that is how it seems to me when I think about your words. Will all moral decency be lost now?
Unfortunately, this will indeed be the case regarding your comparison with Sodom and Gomorrah. Prostitution is more and more perverting in public and will steadily increase, including also in Switzerland. In particular, the sex trade will increase when the European Union emerges in 1993 because many prostitutes, women and men from EU countries, can easily practice their sex trade in Switzerland as well as in all EU countries, whereby the responsible authorities do nothing of importance against it. This is because many of the members of the authorities, both men and women, have themselves already been using the services of female and male prostitutes for many years, which is also why they are only doing something pro forma against the evil practice of prostitution. Also, disabled ones of all kinds are in the new millennium to be led to their sexual desires through the practice of prostitution, whereby an organizational regulation will be envisaged in case this dignityless actually becomes reality, which at present, however, cannot yet be said with certainty. In any case, however, everything will pervert more and more in the coming times, making prostitution, so to speak, an honorable profession and subject to the protection of the state, as well as tax liability and insurance cover. In this manner, the state makes itself a pimp, which, however, its responsible persons and law enforcement officers will not care about, because many of them are men, women frequenting prostitutes, whereby they thus personally profit immorally just as much as the state itself. With regard to prostitution as a profession requiring training, it must be said that the first conceptual advances have already been made, but the unbelievable intention will only be openly discussed in the third millennium. The prostitutional depravity will take unbelievably dirty forms and pervert in such a form that it cannot be any more primitive, whereby it must be said that primitive indigenous peoples do not do such things. It will also be the case that sex advertisements in unbelievably primitive form will be publicly distributed in written media as well as on radio and television.
That sounds really great. The decency, the virtues, and the dignity of the human being are probably lost more and more if I see everything correctly.
Unfortunately, this will be the case because the process of the perversion of many human beings who are solely willing to live their perversion can no longer be stopped.
Because, on the one hand, they are going down the path of least resistance, are no longer living virtuously, are no longer earning their money honestly, and are no longer willing to live in decency and dignity, because they are of the irrational opinion that only the enjoyments, the addictions and vices, etc., signify the life.
Unfortunately, this is the sad truth, which will come true more and more in the time to come, because all the terrible things that are determined by the unstoppably increasing overpopulation are getting out of hand more and more. But all the unaccountable ones of the people and the governments do not want to admit that, which, however, leads in the end to misery without hope of rescue.
Of course, also with regard to criminality, contempt for human beings, inhumanity, and all other conceivable terrible things. Do you still have some time? Shocking Statistics 2003. More than 900 crimes in Switzerland every day. Blick, Zurich, Wednesday, 26th, May 2004.
I am not in a hurry.
Thank you. Then something about the California earthquake zone in the USA. In a few days, on the 16th or 17th, there will be a severe earthquake in San Francisco that is supposed to be around the magnitude 7, as you explained to me when we were there together in the future. About 70 human beings will also have to lose their lives on this occasion. According to your calculations, the resulting damage will be close to USD 5,000 million, and a part of the Old Bay Bridge will collapse. The really big quake is only due in the third millennium, But you told me at the time when you brought me into the future, into the time of the quake, that in Los Angeles in January 1994, thus in about 5 years, there will also be a heavy quake that will have a magnitude of 6 to 7 on the Richter scale. Another bigger quake in California will be in December 2003, as well as one in Panama, and then just another heavy one in Persia, that is to say Iran, if I remember correctly. On that the question, would you know any more details about these quakes?
Of course. Unfortunately, also during the earthquake in the year 1994, a number of human lives will have to be lamented. Their number will be around 60. Incidentally, the tremor will reach a magnitude of 6.6 according to the earthly Richter scale, as it will likewise be the case in the year 2003. The earthquake that will occur in 1994 will cause very serious damage to buildings and roads, as well as to other traffic routes and various other things. More than 20,000 human beings will lose their homes, and many will suffer lighter and heavier injuries. But also the events in December 2003 will bring suffering to the human beings, because in Iran, there will be about 20,000 deaths to be lamented in the earthquake center alone. Also in California and Panama, where the number of deaths will, however, be small and will thus stay at a few, everything will also entail great damage to buildings, as well as in other forms. And as you said, the year 2004 will also be affected by various earthquakes. So will also be Algeria on 11 January and many others around the world, whereby the trigger will be the global tremor caused by the earthquake in Bam.
Very unfortunate, but the human beings in California do not let themselves be deterred. Although they know for certain that one day there will be a more immense rattling than in San Francisco in 1906. It was probably in the month of April, as well as in the years 1857, 1865, 1868, 1898, and 1940. 1906 was in general a year of natural disasters, and indeed worldwide. In San Francisco, after the earthquake, there was even a monstrous firestorm too, and almost 500 deaths. As far as I know, the Italian tenor Enrico Caruso was there at that time, but he managed to get away with nothing but a horror. In the same month, so I think, Vesuvius erupted for about 1 week in Italy and claimed about 150 to 200 dead. In the middle of August, it was Chile's turn, where an earthquake claimed the lives of 11,000 human beings. In the month of March, Taiwan too was rattled, besides the fact that also in Europe and elsewhere in the world, other natural catastrophes like earthquakes, landslides, floods, and storm tides occurred. But there was also something to smile about in this year, namely when the shoemaker Wilhelm Voigt masqueraded as captain with a borrowed uniform and relieved the city treasury of Köpenick by 4,000 marks. And when there was another earthquake in California in 1940, as I also know from the history of the world, there was an even much worse earthquake in Anatolia, where about 50,000 human lives were to be lamented. Unfortunately, this is indeed the case, because they always claim to know everything better and to be smarter than those who actually know the truth. Considering Arabia and Persia, etc., where the houses are often built of mere clay bricks as well as of manure and clay mixed with straw, and are still built in this way, whereby only simple logs are used for the flooring of the upper floors and for the roofs, it is not surprising that even with small earthquakes, everything collapses and buries the human beings under it. Also, the buildings have no cellar rooms, because everything is built only flat on the ground. Consequently, there are no cavities in which human beings could perhaps survive if the buildings collapse. A solid building method for the houses is unfortunately unaffordable for the human beings, which is why it would be up to the governments to be concerned for earthquake-proof residential buildings. But one more question relating to your explanation about the approximately 20,000 deaths in the center of the quake when the really big catastrophe will take place in Persia in December 2003. Why are you saying in the center of the quake? Because that should mean that there will be still more deaths to lament outside it, right?
That is of rightness, because the sprawling outskirts of the city adjoining the center will also be reduced to rubble. The wider surroundings in the country will also be affected by this, so that in these areas alone another 22,000 to 27,000 deaths are to be expected.
Oh, terrible. Then a total of 42,000 to 47,000 human beings would have to be killed by the quake. The governments of such vulnerable countries are really criminal in that they do nothing to create safe buildings. However, the population itself is no better, because neither does it do anything itself which could prevent much suffering, especially with regard to the fact that it simply allows itself to be misled, oppressed, and exploited by the governments. But this is not only the case in Persia, but in many other countries of the earth. In general, the human beings are becoming more and more indifferent to each other, and furthermore more irresponsible in every respect. This is therefore not just concerning the earthquakes the case, but also, for example, in relation to BSE and AIDS in particular, which, as you said, is set to spread again explosively starting in the new millennium. It will also be kept secret for a long time to come, as you said, that not only meat and bone meal is a terrible thing and indeed spreading the BSE to many countries, but also the fish meal that is fed in fish farms, whereby the fish absorb severe toxins and poisonous heavy metals, and human beings then become ill with the worst things when they eat the fish meat. Many are simply incorrigible know-it-alls, envious and lowly intelligent critics who think of themselves as being the wisdom personified. But, about the quake in Iran in December 2003, I would like to know whether this is still linked to the tectonic cycle we were talking about? But something still amazes me. Why are there always far fewer deaths reported during major earthquakes than there actually are?
Your words correspond to what actually is and will continue to be. In addition to the HIV, that is to say, AIDS known already since 1981, that is to say, the human immunodeficiency virus, Chow human immune system weakness virus, which however already appeared about 50 years ago in Earth humans, but was not recognized as such. Unfortunately, still further epidemics and diseases will appear, which could be prevented or contained early if the governments would not conceal the truth. In the same way, this will be the case in the new millennium for a serious lung disease that results from a laboratory accident. In China, during criminal experiments for new biological weapons, and is spread throughout the world. Animals, too, will be carriers of the disease, spreading it and transmitting it to the human beings. Furthermore, all governments around the world will always trivialize everything and claim that this or that would have no harmful effects on the human beings as well as the world of animals and plants, be it with regard to any gas leaks or other leakages of substances into the air or into the water from chemical factories, etc., or with regard to military or Secret Service machinations. For a long time to come, it will also be concealed when diseases and epidemics are carried down from outer space to the earth. But in relation to the earthquakes, the mentioned tectonic cycle of earthquakes still extends very far into the third millennium. Hence, this quake will also be associated with it. In this context, however, other factors will also have to be taken into account, because it is not the cycle alone that will play a decisive role, but the USA in the first instance will bear the brunt of the blame for it. This is because the foundation stone for the quake will be laid by the Second Gulf War, which will be waged by the USA against Iraq, and namely by the monstrous bombardments and the vibrations they will cause, which will extend deep into the Earth's interior. However, the destructive effects will only manifest themselves in the month of December as a result of the severe earthquake, namely in the millennia-old city of Barn, which lies about 1,000 kilometers southeast of the capital Tehran, as you know, since you have been there several times on your journeys between Europe and India. But regarding the 2003 attack by the U.S. Armed Forces, allegedly, the war will be waged to oust the dictator Saddam Hussein, but this will be a deliberate lie on the part of the American president. The real reason will be to be found in three factors. Firstly, George Walker Bush Jr., who will then be in office as President of the USA, will turn into an evangelistic sectarian and elevate himself in sectarian delusion to God's angel of revenge against the Islam and instigate corresponding war raids on Afghanistan and Iraq. Secondly, he wants to realize the traditional delusion of the USA to attain the absolute world domination, to which the supposedly divine order to take worldwide action against terrorism comes very handy to him. And thirdly, the USA has always been eager to take control of the petroleum in the Arab world, especially in relation to Iraq. In that, too, the USA finds a justification for the wars, as is the case with Afghanistan, because that country disposes of very many resources. And as I explained to you earlier, the U.S. President George Walker Bush I mentioned is the son of the U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush, who will be responsible for the first American Gulf War in 1991. And regarding your last question, as a rule, the authorities and the public media only report that number of deaths who are to be deplored as a result of a natural or human-induced disaster, as recorded at the most recent point in time of the official counting. There are then no longer any reports regarding the many hundreds and thousands of deaths still to be found after the last official relief operations or dying subsequently from injuries suffered, because other events in the world are more sensational. The remaining dead in major catastrophes are usually found only weeks, months, or even years later, if they are still found at all. Many simply remain buried and graved without ever being found. Thus, in the case of catastrophes in which human beings are killed, a certain number of deaths must always be reckoned with, which will only be found later or never at all. That may be about a few, but it may also be about many more, to be calculated in tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands.
I see, that is how it is. Good. Regarding the Gulf War. Actually, it will then already be the third Gulf War, because the first took place between Iran and Iraq, namely during the years 1980 to 1988, which means that it ended last year. The war was caused by the Iraqi attempt to change through military gay vault a borderline on the Shat el Arab that had been contractually defined in 1975. But something else. Our scientists keep saying about the aurora borealis that these luminous phenomena, which are caused by the penetration of solar corpuscular particles into the Earth's atmosphere near the magnetic poles and cause gas particles to glow, would only occur between 70 to 500 kilometers above sea level. With Simyase, Ta. I was actually allowed to observe such luminous phenomena both in the regions of the North Pole and the South Pole, whereby, interestingly enough, as I already saw in 1977, the polar luminous phenomena at the South Pole are the exact image of those at the North Pole. If I have understood your explanations correctly, it is the case that the auroral phenomena go far beyond an altitude of 1,000 kilometers, but then you do not call these luminous phenomena auroras anymore. And that is exactly the point, because I can no longer remember the designation. It is also not true that the luminous phenomena only occur up to an altitude of 500 kilometers, rather well beyond 1,000 kilometers high. Northern Lights where there aren't any, San Francisco. To the astonishment of many experts, a military satellite has photographed northern lights at an altitude of 800 kilometers. Blick, Zurich, Friday, 12th of December 2003.
The polar luminous phenomena you mentioned indeed reach up to altitudes of 1,000 and more kilometers. The designation polar light may very well be used for this. We call the luminous phenomena corpuscular lighting. I guess that is the designation that you ask for. Corresponding to the sphere, we also designate the luminous phenomena. Thus, the ones starting from 1,000 kilometers height are called exosphere corpuscular lightings. What lies below relates to the thermosphere, the mesopause, and, to a lesser extent, the mesosphere. In the last two layers also, the glowing night clouds appear, which you have also already often observed.
However, the upper layers you mentioned are also called ionosphere and heterosphere, right? And the electric power of an aurora is said to be well over 100 million kilowatts, if I remember correctly.
That is of rightness.
However, while we are on these matters, I would also like to ask you a question about the lightning strikes that occur high above the clouds at altitudes of between 35 and 100 kilometers. By this I mean the red lightning strikes, which in turn produce blue lightning strikes in the surroundings, which shoot up as far as the ionosphere.
These are so-called collective lightning strikes, as we call them. Each thunderstorm discharge leaves behind certain electrical energies and gases, which settle high above the clouds and accumulate up to a critical mass. Once this is reached, an ignition of the same takes place, which then causes the red lightning phenomenon, through which blue discharges are emitted in their surroundings, which shoot up into the sky with more than 100 kilometers per second. It depends on the intensity of the thunderstorm discharges when the critical mass is reached, and an ignition can take place. Between 90 and 110 thunderstorm discharges are normally necessary before the critical mass is reached, and an ignition can occur.
Good. Thanks for the explanation. As we know, the Earth is not finely round, despite the fact that it is always said to be round like the stars. However, the Earth is minimally more stretched at the equator than at both poles, which is due to the centrifugal force with regard to the Earth's own rotation. We have already been through this before. On my great journey, however, I saw planets and solar structures that looked like a discus due to their self-rotation. On that topic, the question that I can actually answer myself: it is true that the greater, that is to say, faster the self-rotation of a planet or a sun is, the flatter the structure becomes, isn't it? This is correct, isn't it?
That is of rightness.
Something that just interests me. You once spoke about beans and potatoes actually containing poisons that can lead to poisoning and even death for the human being. I remember the word alkaloids. Potatoes become particularly poisonous when stored cold, you said.
That's right. Potatoes contain the alkaloid solanine and develop a dangerous amount of sugar when stored too cool. Due to this, they additionally develop further poisons during roasting at high temperatures, which are, among other things, carcinogenic. But this also applies to many other foods which are roasted or baked. With regard to potatoes, it must be said that they are particularly poisonous in their unripe and green state. Many other plant foods and herbs, as well as tea plants, also contain poisons which can lead to allergies, burns, nausea and vomiting, etc., or may under certain circumstances even be life-threatening if used improperly. For many foods, the principle applies: all too much is unhealthy.
I was asked how dangerous it would actually be to give birth to children by cesarean section. I didn't know any answer on that, except that the operation often causes deformations in the woman's abdomen.
Your answer has been correct, but cesarean sections also increase the rate of stillbirths. The procedure is also not harmless for the woman, because damage to the uterus can also occur. More lightning in dirty air, Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Friday, 14th of November, 2003.
Aha, so not harmless, as they always say. On 31st July, we talked about the lightning. During thunderstorms, I have noticed on several occasions that during particularly warm weather, when the air is impregnated with dust, car and aircraft exhaust fumes and smoke residues from forest and garden fires, as well as from factory chimneys, etc., particularly many lightnings occur. Could it really be so, or am I deceiving myself?
You are not deceiving yourself, because the more polluted the air is, the more lightnings occur. The air pollution is a decisive factor for the development of the lightnings.
Then a question regarding the black holes. On my great journey, Ta made me watch a huge and fantastic structure. It was about two black holes orbiting each other with tremendous speed. The whole thing looked like two water strudels, each of which, while self-rotating, also rotated with each other and already merged into each other. I explained to Ptah that it would certainly be understandable if I named the structure twin black holes that eat each other up. He commented that this hit the nail on the head. Later he took me to an area where I could observe another phenomenon of a similar kind, except that the structure looked like a triangle because it consisted of three black holes. Both phenomena, according to Ta, would be rare, but given. The question on that is whether the earthly astronomy scientists already know such structures. But how does a black hole actually develop unless there is first an explosion of a sun, and only then everything collapses, which of course also occurs. Svath also told me that even an outer space nebula might turn into a black hole.
To your first question, no, that is not the case, and it will probably take until the third millennium before they will discover such objects. The normal formation of a black hole occurs when a sun turns around itself faster and faster until it collapses due to its own gravity. In the process, it drags all the matter of its environment into it and thereby increases its gravitational pull to such an extent that even the photons, that is, the light, disappear into the mass. Likewise, this happens when nebulae are compressed by an increasing rotation in such a way that they form a mass with a gravitational force.
Then everything has an effect like a huge vacuum cleaner that swallows everything that lands in its area of attraction.
That is a good comparison.
You once mentioned briefly that the global warming will also affect the organisms of the human beings, as well as the animals and the plants. You also said that the overfishing of the waters, mainly the oceans, will result in enormous ecological changes, thus thereby disturbing the world of nature and life forms.
That is of rightness. The entire metabolism of human being, animal, and plants is constantly changing due to the global warming. In this respect, the start has already taken place and everything will expand worldwide. The first openly recognizable manifestations of metabolic changes will in the coming times be noticeable in human beings and animals in the form of increased diarrhea attacks. With regard to the overfishing of the waters, it must be said that this will inevitably lead to a very rapid excess of microorganisms in the waters, whereby the entire terrestrial ecology will be disturbed and changed. Thus, very unpleasant and serious things will happen in this respect, which will result in great changes that are detrimental to nature and life.
I see. When you say the entire ecology, then I understand by it all life forms, the air, the water, and the land, as well as their entire interplay. Am I right with that assumption?
Your assumption is of rightness.
Floods and storm surges. Again, I would like to come back to the airstream, that is to say jet stream, of which you spoke. Svath already explained some things to me when he flew with me in the equatorial jet stream once around the world, in his Pear spaceship in the early 1940s. Now what's a little irritating to me? You have spoken of two jet streams, namely one in the north and one in the south. However, Svath said that there were several of them, namely 4 or 5, if I remember correctly. As you did, he also explained that the jet streams, which are global, determine the weather conditions all over the Earth.
That is of rightness, but I did not find it necessary to mention not only the two most important ones, but also those which are not of worldwide significance. Nor was I aware that Svath was teaching you these matters.
However, he had done so. In doing so, he also explained to me that the jet streams in the northern and southern hemispheres were image-like, as were the polar lights, which appear like mirror images at the north and south poles, as I had already mentioned when we talked about the crepuscular lighting.
You have learned a lot from Svath, of which of course I can only be aware of a small part. However, even that which I know is already enormous.
You are too kind, my son. But tell me, while we are mentioning Svath, when I once talked to him about the piracy in the Bermuda Triangle, which has actually meanwhile almost disappeared, he suggested that it would rise again worldwide in the coming time. Do you know anything about that? When we talked about gas planets, he explained that in relation to the formation of gas planets, these would only come about if the accumulating gases would not heat up. What can you briefly tell about this? Pirates attacked 445 ships. The pirate attacks on the world's oceans increase and become more and more with Gewaltsamkeit. Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Thursday, 29. January 2004.
Regarding the piracy, I can't provide you with any information because I don't know anything about it. Gas planets form as gases accumulate and begin to rotate. If the gases remain cold, then densifying gas clusters form in the rotation ring, which rotate in an ever-increasing number around the center, densify more and finally form a solid gas core, around which then further gas clusters circle. If the whole thing does not cool down but remains cold, then what is known as gas planet evolves. However, if heat is generated by the rotation and densification, then the object heats up and transforms.
That is already sufficient, thank you. We have now reached the month of December 2003 with predictions. We should actually leave it at that for today. Although we only discussed the very most important things, it should really be enough with that unless you still have something important to add or explain.
Of course, there are many things worth mentioning, such as concerning the cloning of animals, the human, plant and animal genetic engineering, the advances in surgery and medicine, the general macrotechnology, microtechnology and nanotechnology, the now ragingly fast developing computer sector, and the communication and entertainment technology, the new inventions, the physics and chemistry, the astrophysics, politics, diverse scientific cognitions, the terrorism as well as many natural disasters, celestial phenomena, and discoveries in the universe, etc., which will occur in the next 14 years alone until the end of 2003. But the year 2003 can be concluded with the earthquake in Iran in as far as major world-shaking events are concerned, because something new will only come about in the year 2004, whereby however many things will be very unpleasant. Namely, already at the beginning of the year, as you mentioned, when the first earthquakes in Mexico and Indonesia spread fear and horror on 2nd January. I would like to explain the following in this regard. Maybe when I will come back once more on the 9th of November, before Ptah will continue the contacts with you again, I will be able to explain some additional things. But first I have to talk to Ptah about this, to see whether it will indeed be advisable to still mention additional things of the future, because it is certainly not meant to spread fear and terror. Already all the predictions that I have given to you in all the years until today cannot be coped with by many human beings, which is why you were encouraged to pass on the information only in a close circle and not to make it available to the public media.
Which I have also abided by. A given word is a given word.
I am aware of your correct actions, also that you never break a given promise, which, unfortunately, has often brought you a lot of hardship and damage, also in relation to your marriage.
However, I don't want to talk about that now.
Nevertheless, it is still necessary, because I have to tell you that you have fulfilled your duty and task more than only to the best, and that you are now released from your obligation. The things have fulfilled themselves. Consequently, you do not have to endure further harm from this malicious marriage.
Are you saying that the marriage may already be dissolved right now?
That is of rightness. If the marriage hadn't been necessary for certain reasons, we would have kept you away from it. But ancient determinations did not allow that, as you know. However, the fact that everything developed into much worse patterns brought also much more harm and pain for you than could be expected and calculated. Thus, what we had predicted for you regarding your marriage was not complete, but we ourselves did not know how bad it would really turn out. But you are now free to decide.
I had to fulfill my duty, and so I bit the sour apple. But it's not my style to just bite on something and then not finish eating it. Meaning that I am also going to eat the rest of the sour apple. Some time ago, you said that in 1997, the drama and the marital war would come to an end, because my cannibal herself would simply run away and file for divorce. Since I have overcome everything so far, I will continue to also do so for the remaining years.
It is your choice. However, consider all the bad times you have had, because what is to come will still be some worse. Although there are new rays of hope for you, you must not let them deceive you about the reality. The betrayal of you and of the mission and of the group, as well as the slander, will come to light in the time to come, and will also find its way into the public media.
Do you mean by my wife?
Yes, that is the sense of my explanation.
That too will be bearable. Furthermore, throughout all the years it has been proven that the lies and slander about me, the members of the group and the mission all over the world have caused exactly the opposite of what the liars and slanderers intended.
That is of rightness. Compared to it, the sun is a candle, Darmstadt. This huge red fireball is the most immense thing our universe has to offer. A gamma ray burst. Blick, Zurich. Friday, the January 2004. Nonetheless, lying and slanderous machinations are always very unpleasant because in a certain sense, everything still brings vexation with it, even if in the end, good benefits result from it.
I suppose that is right. But let us leave that alone and talk about something else. On my great journey, Ptah explained to me that some 500 million years ago, in or near our SOL system, a tremendous gamma-ray burst occurred, killing and extinguishing at least 2/3 of all life forms on Earth in the air, on land, and in the water. In 3 to 5 seconds, such a flash is supposed to generate and radiate as much energy as our sun would develop in around 5,000 million years. My question now on this is whether you can explain to me what triggers such gamma bursts that are supposed to be rare in and of themselves. Some time ago we also talked together about the fact that, if I am not mistaken, an asteroid, dangerous to the Earth, will be discovered in the year 2003 or so, which will come dangerously close to the Earth in the year 2014. What will be the exact date of discovery? Then I still recall that you once said something that also in the year 2028 an asteroid would head towards the Earth.
That is of rightness. We have already talked about this. The asteroid, which is to be expected in 2028, will then pass relatively close to the Earth, so the planet will not be affected unless still something unforeseen arises. With regard to the object to be expected in the year 2014, the following has to be explained. We are talking about the large wandering asteroid we call Sauron. It will be discovered on 24th August 2003. It is in fact a dangerous object which can really cause immense harm if it turns out that due to today still incalculable circumstances, it gets even a small fraction out of its orbit, which normally passes very close to the Earth. Already in ancient times, the orbit of the object passed over and over again dangerously near the Earth, whereby both the planet as well as the Earth-Moon were occasionally hit by small asteroid fragments, which dragged along in the tow of the wandering asteroid. And with regard to the formation of the gamma-ray bursts, it has to be explained that they are caused by gigantic discharges when black holes explode.
At the same time, there are of course also wandering black holes, such as the one that drifted around 500,000 years ago to the SOL system and then apparently exploded. It must have been like that, if I'll interpret your words well. Already Svath spoke of wandering black holes, but also Ptah. And in terms of the wandering asteroid, are you saying then that nothing can yet be predicted more precisely in relation to the projectile from outer space? However, a view into the future would certainly make that possible, would it not?
That would certainly be possible, but we have not made any foresight in this respect, because at least for the time being, it is not yet of any importance. And what you said in the context of the gamma-ray burst is correct. At that time, it emerged from a wandering black hole. If a black hole in the center of a galaxy detonates due to a huge discharge, the whole galaxy usually also explodes in a gigantic gamma-ray burst.
Well, no then, that is also fine. Let us thus leave this, by which I mean the wandering asteroids. Thank you for the information regarding the gamma-ray burst. We have also already talked several times about the fact that hair dyeing is harmful to health, that it can cause various types of cancer as well as liver and kidney damage, dizziness, allergies and eczema as well as vision disorders, hearing damage and balance disorders, etc. To this end, I asked you if you could broadly organize and test the hair dyes that are common on Earth. Has that happened in the meantime?
Yes, that is what I have been endeavoring to do. All the agents I could get hold of, there were many hundreds of such substances, and all resulted in the same unpleasant result of a dangerous harmfulness to health.
Which, according to your earlier explanations, had indeed to be expected. Well, then I do not have any more questions for this time.
If that is so, I will go now. Farewell, and see you again. In 1 month I will visit you once more. After that, Ptah will be your official conversation partner. See you again.
Bye, my friend, then until in a month. See you again.